Before we begin, I want you to close your eyes for just one moment and picture your anniversary dinner, the one you planned. The reservation you made 3 weeks in advance because the restaurant fills up fast and you wanted the good table by the window. The dress you bought. The card you wrote and rewrote twice because the first version felt too simple for what you actually wanted to say. You are sitting across from the person you chose above every other person in the entire world. The candles are lit. The wine is poured. And you are thinking, this is it. This is the life I built. This is the person I built it with. And then he reaches into his jacket pocket. And you think you know what is coming. Every woman at that table in that moment thinks she knows exactly what is coming. But you are wrong. You are so catastrophically wrong about what is in that pocket and who it is, for that the life you thought you were living is about to end in the time it takes him to bend one knee. He does not get down on one knee for you. He turns. He stands up from your anniversary dinner, the dinner you planned, the reservation you made, the night you dressed for, and he walks 3 steps to the table directly behind yours, where your best friend of 11 years is sitting. The best friend you invited. The best friend you thought was there to surprise you. And he proposes to her. At your table. On your anniversary. With a ring he picked out while you were sleeping next to him. And the most devastating part. The part that will not leave you even months later when you think you have finally processed all of it. Is that she says yes. She already knew he was going to ask. She had already decided. She had been deciding for a very long time. Welcome to VENOMTHREAD, where the truth is darker than fiction. And tonight we are going all the way to the bottom of it. Her name was Simone. And if you had asked anyone in her life to describe her in one word, the word you would have heard most often was loyal. Simone was the kind of friend who showed up. Not just for the big moments. Not just for the weddings and the promotions and the hospital rooms. But for the ordinary Tuesday nights when something went wrong at work and you needed someone to sit with you and not try to fix it. She was the kind of friend who remembered the small things. The name of your difficult coworker. The appointment you were nervous about. The anniversary of the thing you never fully got over. She carried other people's details the way most people can barely carry their own. She had been best friends with a woman named Priya since they were 23 years old, sitting next to each other at a company orientation for a job neither of them stayed at for longer than 2 years, but that gave them each other, which turned out to be worth more than the job ever was. 11 years of friendship. The kind that has its own history, its own language, its own catalog of shared experiences that nobody outside it fully understands. They had been through job losses and breakups and family deaths and cross-country moves, and the particular grief of watching your 20s become your 30s and realizing the life you planned has taken a completely different shape than you expected. They had been through all of it together. Or so Priya believed. Priya met a man named Marcus in year 9 of her friendship with Simone. She met him at a party that Simone threw. Simone introduced them. Simone said, "You two are going to get along. I can already tell." And she was right. They got along immediately and completely, and within 6 months Priya and Marcus were the kind of couple that other couples looked at and felt something between admiration and envy. He was attentive. He was funny in a specific way that made Priya feel like the funniest person in the room because he laughed at everything she said. He remembered things. He showed up. He was, and this is the word Priya used when she described him to me, present. In a world full of distracted people, he was entirely present with her, and she had never felt so seen by anyone in her life. What Priya did not know, what she could not have known because the information was being actively withheld from her by the 2 people she trusted most, was that Marcus had not been entirely present with her alone. He had been present with Simone first, not romantically at first, or at least not in any way that was acknowledged out loud, but in the way that 2 people are present with each other when they have recognized something in the other person that nobody else has seen yet. Marcus and Simone had a history that predated Priya by 8 months. 8 months of conversations that went long into the night. 8 months of a connection that neither of them had named out loud, but both of them felt completely. And then Simone introduced them at the party. And Priya never knew that the introduction was not generosity. It was a decision. And the decision was not made in her favor. For 2 years, Priya and Marcus built a relationship that she experienced as the most honest and complete thing she had ever had. He met her family. She met his. They moved in together at the 14-month mark into an apartment they chose together and furnished together and made into the specific kind of home that reflects 2 people who have decided on each other completely. Simone was at every single milestone. The housewarming. The first Christmas. The birthday dinners. She was the person Priya called after every fight with Marcus, and Simone always had something measured and wise to say that somehow always resulted in Priya being the one who apologized first. It would be much later before Priya understood why that pattern existed. Much later before she understood that the advice she had been receiving for 2 years from her best friend, her relationship, had been calibrated. Not to help the relationship succeed, but to manage it. To keep it at a particular temperature. Warm enough to maintain. Never hot enough to be certain. And the whole time that Priya was trusting Simone with the most intimate details of her relationship, Simone was taking those details back to Marcus. Feeding him the information he needed to stay one step ahead of every moment of doubt Priya ever had. The 3 of them were in a relationship that only 2 of them knew about. And the one who did not know was the one who was paying the highest price to keep it running. The anniversary dinner was Priya's idea. 2 years together, and she wanted to mark it properly. The restaurant had been significant to them. Their 3rd date, the night Marcus had first said something that made her think this is the one. This is the person I have been waiting to find. She made the reservation herself. She told Simone about it 2 weeks before because she told Simone about everything. And Simone said, "That sounds perfect. You deserve a perfect night." What Simone did not mention was that she had spoken to Marcus the same evening Priya called her about the reservation. What she did not mention was that the conversation between her and Marcus had been ongoing, through a second phone, through a series of encrypted messages, through the infrastructure of a deception that both of them had maintained with extraordinary discipline for the full 2 years of Priya and Marcus's relationship, and that the anniversary dinner had been discussed between the 2 of them not as a celebration of Priya's relationship, but as a deadline, a date they had agreed upon, an ending point that they had both decided on together in a convert hat Priya was never meant to know existed. Priya arrived at the restaurant first. She always arrived first. It was one of the things Marcus said he loved about her. He said it made him feel chosen, that she was always there waiting. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress that she had bought 3 weeks earlier and kept in the back of the closet so he would not see it before that night. She had her hair done that afternoon. She had written the card that morning and tucked it into her bag with the specific care of someone who has put real thought into the words. When Marcus arrived, he looked at her the way he always looked at her, and she felt the specific warmth that she had come to associate entirely with him, and she thought, 2 years. We made it 2 years, and it still feels exactly like this. The wine came, and they ordered, and the conversation was easy the way it was always easy between them. And at some point Priya noticed that Simone was at the table directly behind them, and she felt a rush of pure affection. Of course. Of course Simone came. Of course she wanted to be here for this. That is exactly the kind of friend she is. And then Marcus stood up, and he reached into his jacket, and he turned. In the 10 seconds that followed, Priya's entire understanding of her life, of her relationship, of her friendship, of the 2 years she had just lived, collapsed into something she did not have a word for yet, because there is no word that covers what it feels like to watch the man you love propose to your best friend at your anniversary dinner while you are still holding the card you wrote for him that morning. Simone said yes immediately. She did not hesitate. She did not look at Priya. She looked at Marcus, and she said yes, and she held out her hand, and he put the ring on her finger, and the restaurant began to applaud, because restaurants are full of people who do not know the context of what they are witnessing. People at nearby tables raised their glasses. The waiter smiled, and Priya sat completely still with her wine glass in her hand, and did not make a single sound, because her body had not yet communicated to her mind what her mind needed to do next. Marcus looked at her then for the first time since he stood up, and what she saw in his face was not guilt. It was not cruelty. It was something that she would spend a long time afterward trying to name and would eventually land on as relief. He looked relieved. He had been carrying this for 2 years, and now he had put it down, and his face showed exactly what that felt like for him. And the fact that it looked like relief in a moment that was destroying her told her everything she needed to know about the calculation he had been making for the full duration of their relationship. She was a placeholder, a holding pattern, something to occupy the space between Simone's readiness and this moment. She had been the interim. She set down her wine glass. She picked up her purse. She stood up. She did not cry. She did not speak. She walked out of the restaurant, and the people who had just been applauding watched her go and understood nothing about what they had just witnessed. Here is what Priya did not do in the days that followed. She did not post about it. She did not call mutual friends in tears. She did not send a single message to either Marcus or Simone. She did not show up anywhere she might encounter them. She did not give any public indication that anything at all had happened. Her social media was quiet. Her location was private. She was to anyone watching simply a woman who had gone offline for a while. Unremarkable. Undramatic. Still, inside that stillness, she was working. Because Priya, and this is the thing about her that neither Marcus nor Simone had fully understood despite all the time they had spent studying her, was not a person who acted from emotion when it mattered. She was a person who felt deeply and moved carefully and understood that the difference between a reaction and a response is everything when the stakes are high enough. She had 9 days before Marcus's things were still in their shared apartment. 9 days before the lease she co-signed was still active. 9 days before the joint account they shared for household expenses still had his regular deposits coming in. 9 days in which she was the only person in the world who understood exactly what she was doing and exactly why. She called a lawyer on day 2, not a general attorney, a specialist in lease agreements and property law who also had a background in civil litigation. She laid out the full situation, the shared apartment, whose name held the primary lease, the furniture they had purchased together and how it had been financed, the joint account, and its current balance. The lawyer listened and then said several things that Priya wrote down carefully and did not share with anyone. On day 3 she began moving. Not dramatically, not in the way of a woman in a movie who throws clothes into garbage bags while crying. Methodically, box by box. Every item she had purchased herself documented in a spreadsheet with the original purchase date and price and a photograph. Everything jointly purchased similarly documented with timestamps. Every item of Marcus's that she did not touch organized in a single corner of the apartment and photographed with the time and date visible. On day 5 she called the building manager and began the process of removing Marcus's name from the lease under a provision her lawyer had identified. On day 6, she changed the account that her direct deposit fed into. On day 7, she prepared a document, 10 pages, single-spaced, with dates and screenshots and a full annotated timeline, covering the complete 2-year arc of what she had experienced and what she now understood she had actually been living inside. She did not send this document to anyone yet. She simply had it. Complete, organized, time-stamped, ready. On day 8, she did something that neither Marcus nor Simone anticipated. She reached out to every person in their overlapping social circle, quietly, privately, one at a time, and she told them what had happened. Not hysterically, not with demands, simply with facts and a timeline. She shared the full document with the people who needed the complete picture and gave the summary to the people who only needed the outline. She did this without drama and without asking anyone to choose sides, and without making anyone feel that their relationship with Marcus or Simone was being used against them. She simply ensured that the truth existed in the world before either of the other 2 people involved had the opportunity to construct a narrative that served their version of events. She was not the first person to speak in public, but she was the first person to speak in private. And in the social architecture of a close community, that distinction matters more than almost anything else. On day 9, Marcus came back to the apartment. He had a key. He used it. He walked into a space that had been surgically altered, his things in one corner, every trace of Priya's presence removed with a completeness that must have felt like a message because it was a message. He called her. She answered on the second ring, which surprised him. He began to speak, to explain, to justify, to construct the version of events in which his behavior was the result of complicated circumstances rather than deliberate choices. She let him talk for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. She timed it, and then she said, "I have forwarded the lease modification to your email. Your name is no longer on the agreement. You have 72 hours to collect your belongings, or they will be donated." She said it the way you say something you have practiced until it requires no emotional energy to deliver. And then she hung up. The social fallout arrived the way social fallout always arrives when the truth has been given enough runway before the lie has time to organize itself, quickly and without the possibility of effective rebuttal. The story was already known. The document was already in circulation among the people who mattered. The timeline was already established. When Marcus and Simone attempted to share their version of events, they found that the ground had already been prepared in a way that made their narrative land with the credibility of a story being told by people who had been caught rather than people who had simply fallen in love in difficult circumstances. That distinction is everything. And Priya had made it impossible to obscure before they ever had the chance to try. Simone lost 7 friendships in the 2 weeks following the exposure. Not because Priya asked anyone to choose. She had been explicit that she was not asking for that. But because the people who had been Priya's friends first and Simone's friends by extension made their own calculations when the full picture was available to them, and those calculations did not come out in Simone's favor. The engagement was announced publicly 2 weeks after the restaurant. The comments on that announcement told a complete story about how the social landscape had shifted. Neither Marcus nor Simone deleted the post. But neither of them replied to any comments either. There was nothing to say that would have helped. The apartment was Priya's alone by the end of week 3. She redecorated the living room over a single weekend and posted one photograph of it on her social media with no caption. Just the room. Just the light coming through the window the way it does on a Saturday morning when the space is entirely yours and arranged exactly as you want it and carrying none of the residue of the life that was lived in it before. No explanation. No statement. Just the room. Just the light coming through the window the way it does on a Saturday morning when the space is entirely yours and arranged exactly as you want it and carrying none of the residue of the life that was lived in it before. No explanation. No statement. Just the room. Her followers understood. The people who knew the story understood. And the people who did not know the story simply saw a beautiful room belonging to a woman who seemed to be doing exactly fine. I spoke with Priya several weeks after all of this had settled into whatever shape it was going to take permanently. I asked her what the moment between knowing and doing had felt like. That specific moment when you have the full weight of what has been done to you sitting in your chest, and you have not yet decided what to do with it. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said something that I have thought about every single day since. She said, I think most people in that moment go looking for justice as a feeling. They want someone to be punished. They want the people who hurt them to feel what they feel. And I understand that. I felt that too, for about 48 hours. But then I realized something. Justice is not a feeling. Justice is a structure. And if you build the structure correctly, the feeling follows on its own. You do not have to chase it. You do not have to demand it. You just have to build carefully and let the structure do what structures do. She paused. And then she said, I was not trying to destroy them. I was trying to make sure the truth had the same access to the world that the lie had been given for 2 years. That is all. That is the whole thing. Make the truth available and let people decide what to do with it. I trusted the people in my life to make the right decision when they had the right information. Most of them did. 11 years of friendship. 2 years of a relationship that felt like the most real thing she had ever had. One anniversary dinner that ended everything simultaneously. And 9 days. 9 quiet, deliberate, methodical days that ensured when it was completely over and the ledger was as close to balanced as it was ever going to get. Priya did not yell. She did not beg for explanations that would not have satisfied her anyway. She did not perform her pain for an audience that would have given her sympathy, but not the thing she actually needed, which was the restoration of her own clarity about who she was and what she deserved. She built the structure. She let it stand. And what was left standing at the end of it was entirely hers, built entirely on truth. Impossible to take from her because it had not been given to her by anyone else. She had made it herself in 9 days while the people who betrayed her were planning an engagement party and expecting her to be somewhere falling apart. She was not falling apart. She was building. And the difference between those two things is the whole story. I want you to sit with one thing before you close this episode and move through the rest of your day. The person who hurt you most completely is almost always the person who knew you most completely. That is not a coincidence. Access and intimacy are the tools of the deepest betrayals. You cannot be devastated by a stranger. You can only be devastated by someone who was given the map of everything that matters to you and chose to use it as a weapon instead of protecting it. That is what Marcus had. That is what Simone had. 2 years and 11 years respectively of knowing exactly where Priya was most open and most trusting. And both of them chose, together, deliberately, over an extended and coordinated period, to exploit that knowledge rather than honor it. And what Priya did with that was not retaliate against the access they had been given. She built a new structure that did not require their participation to stand. She protected herself not by becoming harder or more closed, but by becoming more precise, more deliberate, more certain about where the truth was and what it deserved. That is not a small thing. That is one of the hardest things a human being can do in the middle of a betrayal that qualifies as one of the most complete they could have experienced. To choose precision over emotion, structure over reaction, clarity over the very understandable desire to make someone else feel exactly what you are feeling right now. She chose herself, completely and without apology. And 9 days later the world looked different. Not because the people who betrayed her had been punished, but because the truth had been given the same room that the lie had occupied for 2 years. And the truth turned out to be more than enough. It always is, if you let it breathe. Thank you for being here on VENOMTHREAD tonight. If this story hit something in you, if it made you think about loyalty and access and what we owe the people who trust us with the map of themselves, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want to stay in the dark with us every single week. Hit the notification bell because YouTube will absolutely not tell you when we drop without it. Leave a comment and tell me which part of Priya's story stayed with you the longest. Because this community listens. That is what we are here for. New Darkness drops next week. Do not miss it.